So today I'm going to be talking to Sam Kelly. Sam, how are you?
Right. I'm well. I'm well. I mean, obviously, we all feel a lot better when the sun's out.
Absolutely.
Whether you're in it or inside or you're outside, but just gives you a nice feeling.
It does.
And the sun's out today.
It certainly does. Yeah, yeah. So today we're going to be talking about drums. As per
Yeah.
these episodes I've called fundamentals. Um, it's a joke really, but so really we're talking about the sort of fundamentals of drumming. So what the first question I'm really going to sort of throw at you, Sam, is about maybe say somebody comes along and they're just starting to play drums, and like in the old days, you got thrown into a band straight away.
It's the only thing that was left.
Exactly. Yeah, you know what I mean. You got thrown in the deep end straight away.
Yeah.
So, what would your first bit of advice be?
That's the difficult one. Once you sit behind the kit, that's the first thing I'll say. Sit behind it, and if it feels right to you, I suppose it's a bit like it could apply to any instrument. If you pick up a guitar or keyboards or anything, if it feels right, then continue on with it. To be honest, I would say if it doesn't feel right, don't continue, because I think it would be a struggle after that to try and make it work for you. I think with playing an instrument, and especially if you're thinking long term, it needs to come naturally. So first of all, sit behind a kit or pick up whatever instrument and then see how it feels. And then start as if because going right back, taking it to the actual practical side. I mean, when I coach people, I'd say drumming fundamentally is like walking. It's 1, 2, 1, 2. It's based on that. And if you can walk, you can play drums. So that's where I would come from first of all, is that left foot, or right foot, left foot, and try and get that balance in your body.
Yeah.
Forget about your arms, but try and get a balance in your body. And then work from there. If the balance, if you're moving around and that feels natural to you, then that's, even I've been playing for 50 years, and that's still basically my motivation, is if it feels good and my body's balanced. I don't do this anymore, but it's still the metronome and the feel is still there in my head.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I know that you come from that perspective anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, sort of playing along with you and watching you working with other people. That feeling, that sort of thing of the feeling, getting to the feel of what the piece of music's about is really important.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because again, I think out of all the instruments, there's an element of this in the guitar, but not perhaps so much. But there's so much, it could quite easily get into the technical. Well, you do this, and it becomes a bit sort of in your head instead of in your body.
Yeah.
So let's say you got the person who sat, thinks, yeah, this is it. I really feel that's what I want to do. So what's the next thing then? When, let's say they've started playing a little bit, and they can hold a beat together. Are there any sort of bits of advice about that first thing, about being not exactly holding a groove, but you know what I mean, getting a like a 4/4 pattern that, and getting it so that they're not thinking about it, because that's often what goes wrong at the beginning, isn't it? When somebody starts to think about what they do and it all goes pop. It happens with guitar anyway.
Well, I tend to say to people, I would advise what I call drum pattern number 1.
Yeah.
And I think all of us whether you're a musician or not, have tried it around a kit. It's boom, chick, boom, boom, chick, or boom, chick, boom, chick, right, left, right, whatever.
Yeah.
And then try and work that and try and get the coordination between what your right hand's doing and what your left hand's doing and what your right foot's doing and your left foot's doing. Because initially, your right hand and your right foot do the same thing, and your left hand and your left foot do the same thing.
Right.
So that is really right at the beginning, and that's what I would start with. Once you get actually got a pair of sticks in your hand and you're sitting behind the kit, is try and get that coordination between right hand and right foot, etc., etc.
Right.
Hand and foot.
Okay, that's really cool. So we got this, and then we're getting that sort of thing where, let's say people are starting to work together as a team. You know, we found a bass player, and we've maybe there's
right,
okay. So they're getting, this person's got a very basic 4/4 beat that he's holding together. Obviously, there'd be a tendency if somebody wanted to do loads of drum rolls and all the rest of it.
Right, yeah.
So,
but no, don't.
Exactly. I was wondering if that's what you were going to say. So what would your advice be there? Just to keep it simple?
Keep it very, very simple. Because, I mean, drumming really is a very simple thing. I think it's very simple. As I say, you know, if you can walk left, right, it's all based around that. Even if you're playing odd time, 5 or 7s or 9, it's still multiples of that.
Yes.
You know, if you're doing 9, you know, it's 1, 2, 3, 1. You know, it's all very, very simple in that sense.
Yeah.
And if you've got you sitting in a situation in a rehearsal room or band room or whatever you want to call it, and you've got a guitarist, etc., around you, keyboards. Try and think less about the instrument that you're playing, and try and think about what you're hearing from the other people, because you can get a lot of times people can get caught up in, this is a drum and this is what you should be doing.
Yes.
This is what the convention says you should be doing behind a kit.
Yeah.
And you don't sometimes listen to what's going on around it. You say the drummer does boom, chick, and that's what you do. So I would say listen, and it would quite often dictate to you, well, it does to me, what you play.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be complicated.
No.
You know, you cut the cloth where you are as a player to what you put into that piece of music. So if you only know boom chick, that's what you should play. But you can play sometimes or not play sometimes, which you know, is just as important to me as playing and not playing is just as important as making up a piece of music.
Yeah.
The gap.
Yeah. In fact, that's a really good point. I mean, to me, that was a revelation when I was playing guitar and I started playing in a reggae band. And then I realized the more spaces that you put in other words, if you just stopped playing rhythm guitar for a moment and then came back in again a little bit later, it actually did something even more powerful than actually doing something fancy. So
I totally agree.
And it's the same for bass in that environment as well. And I think that's one of those things that's very difficult for people when this is what I'm saying about when people start off, they think, oh, this is what I've got to do with that, and you know, and it all gets a bit sort of heady. And that idea of, well, actually, you don't need to do so much.
No,
it's a bit like, it's almost contrary.
It's a bit like what we're doing. To me, I equate it to like what we're doing at the moment. You could stop, if you're playing an instrument, you can stop and you can listen.
Yeah.
And then you react to what you're hearing. You know, like a conversation. I know they say the old cliche, the music is like blah, blah, blah. But to me, it is. You listen to what's going on and you try and add to it or try and take it off in another direction if necessary, whatever. But you've got to listen fundamentally to what's going on before you can react to it. It's like you saying something to me, then I will hopefully react to what you're saying and vice versa. Yeah. No. And so that's when I love taking it on just slightly another level or taking it in a different, I love depth work, especially if people come in and say, look, come in and play. I don't really necessarily need to know what kind of music it is. I will listen and I think, well, okay. And without having a preconceived what it is, you know, is it rock or is it jazz or da 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 da? See what it tells me. Same thing. Just listen to see what it tells you.
Okay, cool, good. So, obviously, that sounds really simple, but it isn't, of course. Actually, listening. That is one of the. That's one of the challenges that we see every year with people, you know, sort of blues camp. Is you know, what type of listening people are doing, and one of the classic ones that we see generally is that you can actually categorize how people listen. You know, you get the person who's just listening to themselves. Who's, you know, unfortunately they're often guitarists. They're playing too loud. Yeah, they're drowning the vocalist out, and they're probably plausibly out of time with the other. So in other words, it's centered on themselves.
Yeah.
And then you get the other people who are only listening to the people out there and not listening to themselves. And what happens then is sometimes they tend to play a little bit quieter, and they're sort of hidden in the sound.
That's right. Yeah.
But when somebody goes wrong, they go wrong.
Yeah.
This is a real classic one. And then in the end, you get this sort of thing where people are like listening to everything, including themselves. Like they're listening to the sort of spaces in between everything. And they're the ones who are sensitive to what's going on. They're playing at the right level and all the rest of it. And it's quite a difficult thing to explain to people that that's what you're doing. You're listening sort of to everything at the same time.
I was going to say, what else I find sometimes a blues camp, not just blues camp, but listening to people. People are afraid, a lot of times are afraid to make mistakes. And, you know, if you're in a jamming situation, if you're being paid professionally to do a job, then okay, to me, that's a whole different thing. You know, you're going as well prepared, et cetera, as you can. But if you're in a jam, you're in a learning situation. You're in all those things that we're talking about, the listening, the pushing yourself, testing yourself. Make mistakes. You know, if you made a mistake, maybe stop and start again, or try and improvise around. Push yourself all the time. That's why I think for me, one of the things I get from blues camp is one year we did it, and I thought, okay, we could go in and do one of the Michael Jackson tracks. It's something that I can't remember. I can't remember the track anyway, but it's one of the very well-known ones. And I thought, well, okay, if we go in and just turn it into a 5/4, because it's a 4/4 thing, and just add the extra beat. And it was like, oh no, can't do that. Why? Because it already got fixated what the song should be.
Yeah.
And they weren't, they just couldn't let go of that, what they knew, and just let go and say, just add an extra, you know, especially with the drummers, instead of putting the first beat on where you think it should be on the first beat at the next, just where the first beat would be, put your bass drum there, and then try and explain that. It's like, but the joy is after 2 or 3 days of that down there is that there were a few people who were willing to try that. Yeah. And that for me is what blues camp represents, is that pushing that boundary all the time, pushing that envelope all the time.
Yeah. So let's go back to the sort of the basics, you know, of what happens with drumming, right? And how it interacts, because you were saying about listening to the other musicians. I've seen you when you've been coaching the drummers sort of go, so let's listen to the singer, which is sort of suddenly makes them go like, sorry, what were we listening to? Let's listen to the singer and see what the song's about.
Yeah.
So this bit of words of advice from that then, Sam. So when you're listening to when you're working with people, what you do?
What I would say on that, you know, to a beginner, mainly a beginner, is to try and have a combination of convention, like learning to read music, and also to develop your listening. Yeah. And for me, the two is what makes the thing count, because If you play by ear, which a lot of us do from a certain generation, it allows, the restrictions are off, because usually the convention says this doesn't go with this and this can't do this. But if you play by ear and it sounds right and feels right to you, do it. So I think that going back on what we're talking about is do the two, marry the two together, learn to read, and also develop your ear as a musician.
Yeah, very good, very good. So just something about the singer. When you listen to the singer, and you listen to a vocal line.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? Is it a feeling about the thing, or do you listen to the words and think? How do you approach that?
Good question. Right. It's usually what I hear dictates how I approach it, because sometimes you get with a singer, the diction is terrible.
Yeah.
And you can't make out what the song is about, because you can't understand the words it's about. So then for me, I would then try and understand what the melody and what the movements within the song is. And also to kind of go back to the old convention of during verses play quietly, during choruses bring up the volume, so you get some sort of dynamic movement going within. So it's very much what's prominent for me. If the singer is a good singer and the diction's there, I mean, we're lucky enough with most of the time when we do stuff in blues camp, you've got time and you can understand what's going on. So you can either go from you can either let the melody dictate what you play, or you can let the words dictate what you play. Yeah. So whichever one works for you, I think.
Yeah.
Is the answer for me for that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I many years ago I had some involvement with some Indian musicians, and of course their whole thing is about listening to one another and emulating things that somebody else has played or said within the sound.
Yeah.
And that was a revelation to me, because it was like, it was coming from this sort of perspective, well, I'm the guitar player, and this is what I do, and this guy's the bass player.
Yeah.
But this sort of thing of like somebody plays a particular rhythmic pattern on a tablas or something, that would be picked up by the sitar player. And then, they'd play something is almost like an answering phrase within what they were doing. So there was a sort of communication. And I've always found that there's something that doesn't come across very much in Western music. Certainly I saw, but I think it's so important. It does in jazz, or certain types of jazz, it does anyway.
Yes, yeah.
Because I was listening to Herbie Hancock talking about Tony Williams.
As a drummer, yeah.
When they were working with Miles Davis, and the type of things that Williams was doing on the drums, he was trying to get on the keyboards, where Williams would play there'd be four time, but he would play something in a 5 and a 5 and then a 2 type of thing, But again, that idea is quite simple. Well, it's simple. The concept is simple. It takes a lot of training to do, if you see what I mean.
Huge amount, because again, it's a lot of what you're saying. I totally agree. Is a lot of time Western music, especially with drums, saying that once you start, you continue, because it's almost as if the whole thing will collapse if the drummer stops playing. Which is totally not true, and I think it's just been so fixed. Quite a lot of times with the way music is taught.
Yes.
In this country.
Yes.
Is that, this is what you do. You're the drummer, you're the drum and bass player, you're the rhythm section.
Yeah.
You're the backbone to all this thing. For me, that phrase alone puts so much pressure on you. Yeah. Because if you're the backbone to all this, I can't stop playing. From the time I start, I can't stop. So I think a lot more emphasis should be on go with your feel, go with your gut.
Yeah.
What it tells you, it's just like let's say with the conversation thing, is that if you're not contributing anything really at that time, shut up, be quiet, listen to what's going on. And then when you feel it's right, come back in. And if you can get 3 or 4 people in a band and you can get that kind of interaction going, it's wonderful, because you're getting different colors appearing all over the place.
Yeah.
Because people are coming in and out all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so much. I think it's just so much convention. That certain things, as you're saying, the guitar players in this country, especially if you're playing funk, not so much funk, but rock, they're the ones that go to the fore, and everybody else is there to really support them and make them sound good. And it's, to a certain extent, it's true, but everybody should be doing this, and everybody should feel just as important. Sorry, I'm off.
No, this is good, because you see, this is the type of thing I think is really important, because if I knew this stuff when I started out, then it would have changed your perspective about how you did things. Okay, you understand that there's a lot of technical things that you have to do, because it's part of how you learn.
Yeah.
But it's also this sort of thing about where the mind is about all of this. Instead of it being, with that artistic aspect of what you're actually doing. You're playing a piece of music, which is like weird. Music's weird anyway, the best of times. Because you could never really put your finger on what it is that absolutely makes it work.
I'm smart, because I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And it is one of those sort of things. It's sort of like, well, yeah, that was it. And you could do the same thing again the next time, and it's not.
It's different, yeah.
Yeah, it's totally different. Absolutely. So what little sort of technical exercises can people do to sort of get them underway, do you think? Bits of advice that you could...
Well, I would say listen to as many different types of and different styles of music as you can. Everything from jazz to Latin to, because it just increases your knowledge of rhythms, and applying it particularly to the drums. It just increases, because there should be nothing stopping you from bringing all these things into a song.
Yeah.
It's then down to you to see, okay, well, I heard, as an example, I heard a piece by so-and-so artist the other day, and you're playing somewhere, and oh yeah, that might sound nice. And you bring it in, and maybe you play it the first time, it doesn't quite sit in. But the trick to me is you play it again, and you slight variation, and play it again. And so you develop that way. You develop the not just only your own playing, but hopefully what the song's doing. It's. I was just going to say, I try and apply something similar to an album I did a little while ago, because I don't know anything about chords and stuff. I never learned that side of it. I know how to read drum music because we use the same notation basically, but things like chords, I never learned. But when you come as a drummer and you don't know all that convention, you can put things in.
Yes.
Because there's no restriction, because you don't know what you should. Yeah, there's no restriction at all. Yeah. So I think learning and listening to as many different types of musicians as you can, and then take, as you get more proficient at what you're doing, take more what suits you, because eventually I think most musicians want to become not quite unique is not quite a word. You want to become something slightly different.
Yes. You want to find your own voice, don't you?
You want to find your own voice, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the only way you're going to do that, because nothing really is new in that sense.
No.
So you're going to just take little bits from all over the place and add them to who you are. It's as you're getting a little bit more proficient at playing drums. I mean, I've gone the other way. Instead of having a conventional drum kit, a bass drum, maybe 1 or 2 toms, snare, floor tom, etc. I've gone the other way. I've taken, on most of the gigs I do these days, I take the floor tom away, I take the hanging tom away. I play with a snare drum, hi-hat, and one cymbal, because it just makes me think more. Because there's just so much different sounds you could get from just, because if you haven't got the other, you have to make those things work.
Well, that's really interesting, because I was listening to some stuff by Tom Morello, who's the guitarist for Rage Against the Machine and Audio Slave.
Yes, yeah.
And he's a very similar concept to this, because he's got an amazing sound, really bizarre, creative sound. He's hardly got any pedals. As far as guitarists go, he's got about as many pedals as I use, which is actually not that many if you compare that to,
Yeah.
what you could have, but especially when you've got rack systems and everything like that. But the point he was saying, like you're saying, is that the guitars that he had were, tended to be quite inexpensive, that he picked up from somewhere and all the rest of it. But it was like the limitation was the important bit, to limit yourself to what was available. So then you had to find really creative ways of using that instrument.
Exactly.
And he was sort of like reverse engineering things. So he'd say, like, I'd come across this sound and think, that's a bit weird. What can I do with that? Instead of going, I've got this sound in my head, which I'm trying to find, so I've got to go and buy all these pedals, you see, or I've got to get this type of guitar. And again, this comes back to that idea of, if you haven't got a load of stuff in your head about what you should be doing and all the rest of it, and what you should sound like, and then you start to limit yourself down, you have to be really creative.
Which you can be, because I feel like, for me, if I go out and play and there's a full drum kit there, for me it's like, wow. I use the toms less as a way of filling in the normal conventional sense that you use toms. I use them for color.
Yeah.
Because what I've learned to do is I've learned to play the snare drum in such a way that I play the eights where you normally play with your right hand on the hi-hat. I play with my left foot. So I have both hands free to play on a snare drum. And I can still play, I can still get a funk sound, I can still get a jazz sound, I can still get all sorts of different, just by hitting the snare the snare drum in a different place. Yeah. If I want a high pitch, I hit near the rim, etc. As you're saying, it's what you have right there. I don't have normally. This is when I'm playing, as I say, playing my own kit. But when I go out and I play with the song, it's beautiful. So I'm using the toms as colors, little touches here and there. Yeah. It's wonderful. But I don't want to go back to that right now. I don't want to go back and play a conventional kit. I like to bring it in every once in a while. Yeah.
And I can really appreciate that. With like the thing about guitar, it's a very similar thing. If you can find yourself an old guitar that you can, that costs you virtually nothing, and put some different types of strings on, put it in another tuning, and do something else with it. It's like suddenly you've got this amazing bit of kit that wasn't expensive, and is a process in itself, is a creative process. Just getting that instrument to do that thing that you wouldn't necessarily have done before, if you see.
Really pushes your imagination.
It does, it does. And I think this.
Let me ask you a question. But you touched on something a little while ago. You said early in your career you played in a reggae band. How easy was it? How difficult was it to you to play less? You know what I mean? Playing reggae. To come out of, because I'm taking it that you were more conventionally trained. As a guitarist.
It was interesting. It was very interesting because we came at it from a sort of unexpected direction, because we were doing, I don't know, some sort of folky, rocky, whatever.
Yeah.
And the bass player who was with us again, we're a bunch of guys from Dartford, right? So we're talking, we're talking Rolling Stones territory here.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So if you think about somebody like Keith Richards, there were a lot of characters like Keith Richards, and the bass player was like a Keith Richards. He could just do things that sounded really good. He didn't have a faintest idea what he was doing. He didn't know the notes of his bass or anything. But he worked in a load of punk bands and things. But this guy could play a really seriously good reggae bass part, So what happened was that took us down that sort of rabbit hole. We started listening to a lot of reggae acts, apart from the obvious ones like Black Uhuru and Yellow Man and people like that. So we were really getting into what was going on. But then what we did was we realized that we could fold in all these other things. So it was a bit like a more eclectic version of reggae, like sort of like the Police would have done. But
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
So when we played the reggae bits, they sounded, well, people said we sounded like the Clash, that type of mixing those reggae elements into stuff in a way that it really had the groove, right? And it took a while. I think it took us about nearly a year to get it right.
You're a natural.
Yeah. And we were already pretty good.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was like stripping ideas back, analyzing something. Like we would take something that you could look at and go, that looks like a Rolling Stones number, but we could deconstruct it and it would groove. We'd play it as a reggae.
Strip that.
Yeah. So, and to get the elements right, and a lot of it was, not doing the guitar, stripping the guitar back. So it's difficult to put your finger on exactly what it was that had to be done. But as you say, you can't overplay.
But I was just wondering how difficult. You've explained it to me.
It originally was
because you're just saying you're coming from the conventional sense of this is what I'm a lead guitarist or I'm a rhythm guitarist.
Yeah.
It must be more for rhythm guitarists to come away from playing all that rhythm and fill in all those holes.
Yeah.
To especially playing with reggae, just playing those chops. Check.
Yeah. So the thing is,
and sitting on that for.
Yeah. So what I realised was that the guitar was a part of the drum kit. Okay. So if you look at the structure of, say, a piece of rock music, the guitar and the bass are quite close sonically. The bass is playing more of a toppy sort of sound, if you see what I mean.
Right, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
And the guitar is playing a thicker, bassier chord sequence, so they're there like that. And then certain rock bands will have high vocals, but not necessarily. So it's all sort of like there, and the drums are doing something sort of like to weigh that down and driving. So it's like literally like a sledgehammer, rock music generally. Then if you look at reggae, it does this. The dynamic range goes like
huge,
really low bass,
huge,
possibly really high guitar part, because it's got that, staccato type guitar, and that even that snare drum sound. So the sound is you've done this. So the guitar really sits in.
You say you stretched that whole thing out, really. Yeah.
So really, all what was going on was that the guitar was sitting in the drum pattern. That's how I used to look at it.
Yeah.
And obviously, a lot of the guitar parts sync in other forms of music with a hi-hat anyway. Good thing for guitarists to realise. Right?
Don't tell them too much, because it makes it what you, if you see what I mean. But go on,
Yeah. But you see what I mean. So once you got that, and then you realised how that groove worked, you could play around with that groove quite a bit. You could, do like the echo, like the dub echo thing.
That's right. Yeah.
To time the echo was impossible, so you could do it manually. It's the only way really you could do that. So as you play, that would give you dynamic. So you could stop or put an echo on the guitar by just chink, 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 and leave it
Yeah.
And then come back in again. So all that sort of stuff. We learn all these little tricks. And yeah.
But you see, why I asked you that really is to say you're more, I'm assuming, more conventionally trained, as you know, that not only in your playing but you're thinking of this is what a guitarist should. I was never trained.
Well,
you know what I mean. So my first thing was to go in and listen to the bass player.
Yeah.
My first band I was ever in is to go in and not exactly try and copy it, but try and complement the bass player. So yeah, I'll just, you know, because it's,
well, actually,
it seems so natural to me.
Although
you know, so I just want
to. I was sort of quite eclectic in how I do things. You probably realise this anyway.
Yeah.
So, although because I played classical guitar, that was really like how I understood everything. But of course, the classical guitar only has a certain amount of stuff, and then you interface that with the jazz theory. But because I'm sort of this sort of mercurial sort of character, I can quite easily shut that off and then just sit in another sort of mind frame where you're like, you understand this, but certain things it's like, don't even think about it. Just listen. And feel what's going on here. You know, what's going on with the bass? Where's the space? What's going on with the drums? What's going on with maybe the second guitar or keyboards? And then allowing the guitar to move within that. So I didn't have a problem, but I know because I've taught a load of kids to play reggae, and it's actually started. It actually started when they put that on the syllabus on one of the key stages. I can't remember
really
key stages, but it was about learning blues and reggae.
And reggae, right? Okay,
Kids in the classroom, and of course you know it's one of those things you sort of go like, oh yeah, this will be fun. You know, I didn't have to do it, but I was listening to teachers trying to teach this stuff. You know, and of course it's like, well, why is it that white guys can't play syncopated? Because they can't. They have to learn how to syncopate. But I've taught a number of black kids, and they never have a problem. They never have a problem, and it doesn't matter where they are in the scheme of things. They can syncopate, and I just thought, well, you know, it's almost like the white people just want to march everywhere. It's got you know
there it is. I mean, it's like along that line, just extending that a little bit further. I was in a gospel band some years ago,
right,
and I was playing in France,
right,
and we're in a church. It's great atmosphere and everything else. And the lady I was working with, you know, she's got the sounding board underneath her piano, and the foot's going, you know, and all the people in the audience wanted to clap, and they were clapping on what would be the 1 and 3.
Yeah.
And it was completely throwing me off. This is after playing drums for 20 or maybe 30 odd years.
Yeah.
I'm still letting something like that because I'm hearing all this hand clapping going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Yeah, so it's that marching thing, and I didn't realize it for ages. And I asked somebody that same question, and they said, it's where the march influence comes from.
Do you know what nailed it for me? I was driving through South London, right, pondering this stuff about kids trying to learn how to syncopate, because it wasn't just reggae, it was also funk, you know.
Yeah.
And I saw some black women walking down the street, and I thought, that's it, because they swayed as they walked.
Yeah.
You get.
Well, I know exactly what you mean.
And I thought, oh my God. And then I saw, you know, a white woman walking down, and she was marching down the street.
Yeah.
There was no sway, and I thought, that's it. It's instinctive. It's just
that's
in your bones, right? And so that is one of the hardest things to teach. So when it goes, we're talking rhythm here, right? That is fascinating. That fascinates me. That sort of thing about what is it? Because you said right at the beginning about feeling, sit behind a drum kit, does it feel right, type of thing. And I think really when it comes down to rhythm, it is absolutely so much like that. And of course, you can learn to do that stuff, but it is a thing. It's certainly a thing that you have to become familiar with what that rhythm feels like. I think that sums it up.
It's got to be repetitive because it's got to sink in past the numbers. The 1, 2, 3, 4. It's got to sink in and get into your core. But do you find now when you go out and play sometimes, and when you play with people who haven't got that core feel, you find it very difficult. You find that edge happening because they're trying to pull you. Rhythmically and also timing wise and everything else in that direction. You find that you have to. I find that quite often. And initially maybe the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes playing with in a band, you get that conflict going on. Do you find it now that you see, you can feel those things that we're talking about, being able to drop out and so on?
Yeah, the first time I was really aware of this. I had a project on, this is years ago, but I had a project on. It was part of a band that I was sort of like my band. And then there was another part, because the politics of all this, and there was a record company involved and everything, there was another element of another band that came in. So the guy who was the bass player was the guy who worked with me, right? Some guy called Andy. And there was another guy, I think. Okay, so the keyboard player came from the other band and the drummer came from another band. That we had another guitarist who was to do with me. But anyway, so we're doing this thing, and we played. And I just thought, God, I just sound crap. And I couldn't work out what it was. So we finished this sort of rehearsal type thing, walked out, and we were packing the gear away. And I said to him, I don't know about you. So I said, but I was actually... He went, yeah. He said, I don't know what was going on. Anyway, we sat down and we listened to the recording of these tracks that we'd done. And he went to me, the drummer's out of time. And it was so subtle that you didn't realise it was him. But this is sort of similar to what you're saying, but it wasn't in the pocket. It was just somewhere else, and it just made you feel that you were wrong. But it was actually the drummer.
I had that experience with one of the people. I went into their band in the 80s, and it was a setup. They were already set up. The bass player, everybody else. They just needed another drummer, and I came in, and I played, and I'm playing up there, and I'm playing. I hope what I thought was playing my heart out. I'm loving this stuff, and listening back, as you said, listening back to this thing, it just fell. It just fell, and it was like I was so disappointed because it just didn't sit where I thought it was sitting until I got back and played. It's so disconcerting. It made me kind of start to lose my confidence in my playing. And I think my timing's out, my playing's out, my thinking is out, because there's still all these ideas I'm trying to put in, but still trying to keep things in time, near enough in time, if you see what I mean, or in the pocket. But it just didn't. So I found that really a shattering, as you said, a shattering moment. I nearly gave up. It hit me that badly because I've been playing for ages and what I was considering myself progressing a player, and then getting into the situation, and it just went bang. You're not. It's good. Not good. It comes across that you're not where you think you are. And do I need to go back and start this whole thing again? And they say until I actually listen back to everything else that was going on.
You see, the thing is, it wasn't necessarily you, because it was the other elements of the band, you see. And that's actually a really tricky thing to realize, how that can sort of manifest, because it's sort of very strange when it happens, because it just doesn't sit right, as you say. It's not obvious.
No, but it comes across, and I think the people, what I call the frontline people, can feel it, because they're far enough away from all the other sounds that are going on, and to use the old expression, the vibe that's happening or not happening, and then come off that stage. Oh yeah, as you're saying, it doesn't, it's not happening. Not doing it. It's not doing it. Yeah.
Cool.
But that's another thing. Going back to your original question, is to, once you go with the drums, is to be able to feel, to have enough. What's the word I'm looking for? To have enough gonads. You know what I mean? To make it work, because one of the people who, if something isn't quite right on stage, and it happens, we all know it happens, the person who gets the flack is usually the drummer, and you've got to have enough. You've got to have enough strength to think, okay, if it's not going well, going back to what we're talking about, come away from it, maybe hopefully listen to it and then work it out with the other people. But at that moment, you can get enough people turning around and looking at you as a musician, and you can get smaller and smaller and smaller, and your confidence goes. And that's another thing that I think you've got to learn and build along with your playing. Along with your technique and everything else, you've got to build that when you're up on that stage, right or wrong or whatever, this is where it is.
Yeah.
And then don't get intimidated. No. Don't get intimidated by what can be going on around you.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's a very important thing to learn.
Yes, it is.
On all instruments, but I think in particular for drum and bass.
Yeah.
It just came back to me just now. Talking about what we were saying.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So it's great, Sam. We've done nearly an hour, mate. So that's.
Oh no, you got me talking again.
Yeah, it's good. So your closing advice then for drummers. What about sort of? Well, probably they've already got a kit, but let's say they haven't. Somebody's looking at upgrading. Let's say
upgrading. You hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head. No, seriously, it's any instrument. I think when you're starting out, there's absolutely no need to pay thousands on an instrument. Get yourself a nice cheap instrument just in case you change your mind, because you may want to move from drums to bass or vice versa and move all over the place. You haven't settled in. I mean, I was lucky that the first instrument I picked up was drums, and it was my instrument. It worked together. And then as you progress, you get better and better and better, because it just better quality instruments, because it makes you play. I think it makes you play better. So by the time if you ever get to that stage where you're full professional, you have the kit or you have the instrument that makes you want to talk and makes you want to play that instrument. That's what I would suggest to people. Just start cheap, get more expensive as you go along.
Yep, good one. Anyway, great to speak to you.
Brilliant.
You will be meeting up in real life.
I am so looking forward to coming back. Coming back to coming back down to the sessions. To Blues Camp, and I think I've been doing it now for 6 years.
Yeah.
Probably
even more.
Aside a couple of years that we haven't, but
we had that was my fault.
Enforced. Well, the thing is, as you say, with these kind of if you get the same people coming along, which we do tend to have that same core.
Yeah, we do have a lot of people.
You have to keep them interested. You can't keep feeding them the same thing.
Oh no, it's always different.
You're giving them ideas. You've got to move it around, or you present things that you've been talking about for years, but you've got to present them in a different way. You've got to keep them interested.
I've got some things up my sleeve.
Just don't hand me a guitar.
No. I'll teach you some chords. I will do that though.
Okay, we'll try and play some chords on the drums.
Yeah. I'll see you soon. Take care.
All right, mate. You take care. Thanks again, mate.